as Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, when teaching Sanatana Goswami, described the principle of bhogatyaga. There's a natural desire within the heart of every living entity who is searching for pleasure to enjoy. However, when a living entity tries to enjoy in connection with matter, Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, Yehi samsparshaja bhoga dukkha yonaya evate adyantavanta konteya nateshu ramate buddha. That an intelligent person doesn't search for happiness by contact with the senses of the objects. He says because adyantavanta, it has a beginning and it has an end. And therefore a wise person doesn't take pleasure in them. What's more interesting to me is that in the very endeavor to enjoy the material world, one starts to suffer because we're incompatible with matter and the experience is never fulfilling. In fact, he gives a metaphor in this verse, Yehi samsparshaja, where he says, dukkha yonaya. Yonaya means the womb and dukkha means misery. So as soon as you touch the material world with the intention of enjoying it, then there's something born. And from the womb of material nature comes little dukkhi, which means misery. A little child named Dukkhi. We could make a documentary film about the material world called A Little Child Named Dukkhi. It brings misery to everybody. And in the prayers of Prahlad Maharaj to Lord Nrsingadev, he says, Kutra Shisha Shruti Sukham Mrigatrishni Rupam. He asked the question, Kutra, where's the pleasure everybody's talking about? He says it's Shruti Sukham. Sukham means happiness and Shruti means to hear. So we hear about it, but he says it's Mrigatrishni Rupa, the form that deers run after in the desert, which is a mirage. They see water, they're sure it's there, but when they chase it, it retreats and they can't ever reach it. And therefore, he recommends, does Prahlad Maharaj and Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, be smarter than that. Don't pursue something that has a beginning and end. Don't pursue those things that retreat. Without knowledge of the source of the mirage, of course, if you see a mirage or if you get counterfeit money, you must know that there's real money somewhere else or there's real water somewhere else. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to accommodate the idea of fake water. And one who doesn't know about the source of that, of the mirage, will then come to an erroneous conclusion that I should give up the material world. And that's called tyaga. And if we were to swing a pendulum, it goes back and forth. It hits bhoga, and then once I become frustrated with trying to enjoy material sense gratification, then there's the opposite idea that let me give up everything in the material world. And I might even make a philosophy based on that I'll renounce the whole world and I'll touch it as little as possible and try to quell any desire that I have at all and become something that is quite unnatural for the soul, which is nothing. And Lord Chaitanya said that without spiritual knowledge, we swing from one side to the next, just as a pendulum swings from bhoga and then tyaga. He also described the kind of enjoyment we get in the material world, just to pile on, as chapala sukha. So sukha is happiness, but it's chapala. Chapala means it's flickering. And a poet once said that, yes, there's happiness in the material world, But he compared it to a person who's in the desert and needs water to survive. And then some person comes along and says, "You'd like water? I can accommodate you." But then he pulls out an eyedropper and gives one drop of water. You can't deny that it's water, but it's not enough. And as Prabhupada explains in the context of it, talking about Lord Chaitanya's teachings about Chapala Sukha, we need lots of water, oceans of water, to satisfy our need for pleasure. But in the material world, we're getting the eyedropper, one drop. And Chapala means something that's fickle. It's here today, gone tomorrow. It evaporates very quickly. So then he described how if we get sambandha jnana, or knowledge about our relationship with Krishna, then we can turn our attention to Krishna and we'll feel satisfied. In fact, in various places in the Bhagavatam, it's described how the main difficulty for anyone in this world is being separated from Krishna or looking away from Krishna. And the solution is to look back towards him. For instance, in the 11th canto of the Bhagavatam, it's mentioned, Bhakti Parishanupava Viraktir. Excuse me, wrong verse. Bhayam dvitiya binibesha tasyad ishad apetasya viparyo smriti. Which means that when we forget about our relationship with Krishna and we pursue happiness elsewhere, first of all, it's compared to not in this verse, but elsewhere, to a person who has an oasis and then they go off into the desert to find water somewhere else. But fear arises when we forget about our relationship with Krishna. And Bhayam Dvitiya, we see something separate from Krishna, although nothing is separate from Krishna. In the Chatra Shloki Bhagavatam, Krishna tells Brahma, Ratirtam yat pratiyeta na pratiyeta chatmani tad vidyat atmayo mayam yatabhaso yata tamaha. There is nothing that's disconnected to me, but if you see it as such, then that's maya. It's the definition of illusion. And in such an illusion called dvitiya, a dual conception that there's something separate from Krishna, then fear arises. I fear for my security. I fear that I'll be vanquished, and nothing seems to be enough. So the verse goes on to say that in this condition we become a competitor to Krishna. But you can solve the problem by turning your attention back to Krishna. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu described that as the process of devotional service. And the most important aspect and the way that one begins that is by hearing. If we hear about our relationship with Krishna, then we'll have the wherewithal to pursue it. And there's an example in the Bhagavatam, in the prayers by the personified Vedas. It's a very philosophical chapter, but it's very satisfying. And there's a story of a poor man who's lost in life, and he's standing on the street, and he runs into another person, and they start up a conversation, and then the passerby notices that the poor man who's suffering has something hanging around his neck, and he points it out. And then the poor man, who had forgotten about a jewel around his neck, pulls it out and realizes that he has great wealth. The jewel was there the whole time. It's an invaluable jewel, family heirloom. And his memory is revived within a second that I'm not poor, but I'm actually rich. It's similar to the story I told last night. But the idea is that when we're reminded that we're actually born of nectar, as the Vedas say. You're born of nectar, return to it. Then we'll have the enthusiasm and the discrimination to turn our attention towards spiritual sense gratification. And one can become satisfied by that in the process of devotional service, beginning with Shravanam, Kīrtanam, Vishnu Smaranam. And of course, everyone searches for some social interaction. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, throughout the Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, demonstrates what liberated life looks like. In the association of his devotees, they have various fun activities that they engage in. Like one of them is cleansing the Gudnicha temple. And Jagannath Puri, the place where Lord Jagannath lives, there's a festival every year called Ratha-yātrā. And before the Ratha-yātrā ceremony, they get the Gundicha temple ready for the Lord to come and stay in. It has to be clean because the Lord comes on his chariot and then stays there. It represents Vrindavan. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu went to the janitor, the temple commander of that Gudijam Mandir, and he asked that he and his men be given the opportunity to clean the temple. And at first, the temple commander complained, and he said, well, you're the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Why should you be cleaning the temple? We should clean it, and to serve you. But Mahaprabhu insisted, and he and all of his associates then were supplied with hundreds and then thousands of clay pots with water. And the devotees formed a line so that they could get those water pots passed along, and then they would pour them in the temple and take out all the debris. Of course, it's mentioned they first took out the dust, the larger particles within the temple. They swept it. And there's a way in which everybody knows when you start to clean, some of the larger debris comes out first, and then you'll start noticing there's finer dust and so forth. So Mahaprabhu first facilitated and set the example for taking out the larger debris and then the smaller debris. And he would have the devotees who were cleaning to put the result of their cleaning into piles. And he would especially appreciate and praise the ones who were able to develop the largest pile. And he would encourage them that they should be teaching others how to also clean so well. But Mahaprabhu's pile was the biggest. And he was setting an example, cleansing the temple. And then came the water pots. And at the time that they were taking the water and pouring it into the temple floor and then sweeping the water out the door, they didn't say anything but Hare Krishna. In order to indicate anything, they would say Hare Krishna. We should have a day like that. And if somebody wanted a water pot, they'd say Hare Krishna. If somebody wanted to go past somebody else, they'd say Hare Krishna. Everything was just chanting. There's much made of this cleansing the Gundicha temple. First of all, the devotees were happily engaged, and they felt to be in a kind of a spiritual trance, cleansing the temple. And that's one of the aspects we read just the other morning from the Guru Vashtakam about the cleaning of the temple. Mandira Marjanada, which means to clean the temple. So that's something you can do in association with all the devotees. And then in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, there are plenty of stories about taking prasadam. And if one were to be a tyagi, one would eat very austerely and maybe just take a little something that doesn't taste very good. Or if one's a bogey, then would eat boga, literally. And then if one's a devotee, then there's spiritual food, prasadam. And since everyone likes to eat, it's really important to have a time when you take prasadam. And then the devotees would sit with one another and they'd all take prasadam together in a very joyful way. In fact, Bhaktivinoda Thakur has written several songs, not just Sharira Advidyajal, but he wrote songs after that, like Ekadina Shantipure. And if you look in the Gitavali, where these songs are listed, you'll find that he labeled them, each one of them was for a different phase of taking prasadam. Some of the songs, he said you sing before, some of them you sing during taking prasadam. So the devotees in the assembly would be singing out these various songs, glorifying prasadam, taking of prasadam in different ways. For instance, in the song that comes after Ekadina Shantipure is the description how Mother Sachi had fed Madhavendra Puri and other sannyasis. And they had declared that today, by one sitting and taking prasadam, we will surpass the spiritual practice of a yogi who sits for 10,000 years in meditation just by taking prasadam one time. And he says some of the songs in the Gitavali are for taking kitri. You could all learn that song, as you take so much kitri, and you could sing that song. And then there are other songs for taking sweets. And of course, they had spiritual bodies, so I suppose they could go on eating sweets unlimitedly. But it's a joyful process. In other words, there's the joy of sitting together. And I remember living in the ashram. One day I was in Chicago, and we all sat down to take prasadam. And I was thinking that how could life get any better than this? Have a morning program, and then you sit with all your friends and eat the nicest prasadam, and there's so much camaraderie that it fills up the heart that you don't want to be anywhere else. That's real renunciation. The kind of sense gratification one gets in spiritual life has to do with you feel fulfilled by your relationships with the devotees. And Bhakti provides that opportunity to take prasadam together, sing songs while you're eating, and then afterwards there's more kirtan to do, because everyone feels so happy upon taking prasadam. The devotees get up and they chant more and they chant more and they chant more. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu would also go with his devotees to various holy places. And in those places they would remember Krishna and tell stories of Krishna, and they'd feel satisfied. And that's part of our tradition. In fact, it's mentioned in the Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita that there are 64 items of devotional service, and one of them is to live in a holy dham. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, out of the 64 items, he picked out 5 that are the most potent out of the 64. And one of them is to live in the dham. That's something devotees have to look forward to. Most people think about going as a tourist somewhere. It's more like if they have an interest in a place, besides just finding a place with a swimming pool and nice weather, they might go look at interesting places like that have some historical significance, like maybe the pyramids somewhere or some ruins from some ancient civilization. And then it becomes more like National Geographic. And it's not that pleasurable. In fact, I once went to a place that was supposed to be one of the more beautiful places in the world, and it was the worst place I ever went. Turned out it was spring break, and everyone else had the same idea. And it was noisy all night long. In fact, twice I've been to places that, one was Sardinia. I had to go to a conference there. And everyone told me, oh, you're going to Sardinia, you're so lucky. I mean, people who didn't know about devotional service. They said, Sardinia is the most beautiful place in the world. You're going to love it. And I hated it because it was just a place. And so was another place I went to, Belize. And I realized that nothing's any fun unless there's devotees and temples and kīrtan and prasādam and festivals. And what to speak of the devotional arts? People who like to do artistic things are in luck, because devotional service is really about arts and crafts. In the spiritual world, people don't do boring stuff. They only do things that are fun and beautiful. So they make flower garlands of all types. And I've seen recently in our center in is kind of Silicon Valley, that there's a group of devotees who get together regularly. Their meditation is how to make the best flower garlands on the planet. They're meditating on it now. In fact, Krishnangi Gopi had to leave early because one of the devotees couldn't make it to the flower garland circle, and she had to be there to fill in. They do amazing work. Artistically, I've never seen anything like it. And then there's art, painting, and then there's music. Really, the spiritual world is defined by raga. In fact, in the Bhagavatam, it says that every gopi in the spiritual world has her own individual raga. And then it also goes on to say that every species has its own raga. And then it goes on to say that every living entity has its own raga. In other words, there's a song that resonates with us that we offer to Krishna, and it represents our mood in relationship with Krishna. There's music, there's unlimited varieties of food, there are relationships with devotees and moods of friendship, which include giving gifts, accepting gifts, giving prasad, accepting prasad, and then revealing one's mind, talking about one's realizations or one's trepidations, and then hearing the other one described. Oftentimes people who don't have the surrounding of devotional service don't get very deep conversations in places where they can reveal their minds and what to speak of. Of course, everyone likes to break bread and share food, but then the quality of the food, if it's not prasadam, might actually bring one's consciousness to a lower level. And giving gifts can be also in a similar vein. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, there's Sambandha Gyan, we have a relationship with Krishna, and Krishna means with all his devotees. And if you hear about it, and then also participate in it, because the way devotional service works is, even in this world, you can perform devotional service by associating with devotees, chanting, hearing, and so forth. Then you'll start to feel happy. And it's a kind of sense gratification that is fully satisfying. I would have to say that finishing a Govardhan Parikrama and going on a day of book distribution or attending a really nice Hare Krishna festival, these three things I can think of. Or finishing 16 rounds without moving. There's 4 things I can think of. I could think of a lot more though, but I'm going to start with these. They all have a way of leaving us feeling fully satisfied. You finish your Govardhan Parikram, it takes a little work. You have to really hoof it around, but when you come to the end, you feel naturally happy. Your whole body is vibrating. And festivals. I noticed that renunciation at a festival is something you don't even notice because, for instance, at Janmashtami, devotees generally fast all day. They don't take anything until midnight, after midnight, 12:30, 12:45 if the kīrtan goes on. And they don't even remember to eat because during Janmashtami everyone has unlimited opportunity just to do service all day and hear and chant without anybody bugging them and saying, hey, you can't do that now. you got to go to work or you got to take a phone call. It's all off limits. And we get to feel what it's like if you just engage in devotional service without any other concern. Happens on retreats also. Whenever devotees come to these yatras and they have an opportunity just hear and chant and do nothing else for 7-10 days, afterwards they say that we want to go home. What to speak of the day on which the devotees recite the whole Bhagavad Gita together? You'd think that it would get boring after 6 chapters, 8 chapters, but I can tell you that after the whole group chants the whole Bhagavad Gita, the main suggestion or comment I get, I guess it's a suggestion or a question. The question is, can we do this every day? Or at least once a week? No one says, that was so boring, I never want to do it again. I've also noticed at Govardhan Hill, when we're walking around, other people, they do the Dandavat Parikram. I've never seen anybody unhappy doing Dandavat Parikram. Even little kids, they pack them in the train and they say, we're going on vacation. And where are they going? To Govardhan Hill to do Dandavat Parikram with the whole family. And there's the kids going around, one Dandavat after another, and you look at them and they all look happy because they're doing some austerity in relationship to Krishna. And devotional service means that we have a whole lifetime, fulfilling lifetime of all these activities. There's so many that it's hard to choose from which one wants to do next. Material life, on the other hand, by contrast, seems ludicrous. I was just comparing notes with Devavrata last night. He said something that I've noticed many times and even mentioned, that at the Los Angeles Ratha-yātrā, everyone lives on one block, all the devotees. So if you stay there and do service and go to Maṅgal Ārti and just, you really don't have to leave the atmosphere of the temple at all. Because you just walk across the street and go back. And usually we stay there for a few days to prepare for the Ratha-yātrā. And then you get in a car, you go to the Ratha-yātrā, and you get dropped off right at the carts. So you're still in that atmosphere. You get to the festival, you're there. And then when you have to go home, you have to walk across the Venice Beach boardwalk, and there you notice a completely different environment. And there's always a very noticeable contrast between the spiritual energy and the material energy. And one of my thoughts oftentimes is, I'm surprised that people are still doing that. Because I start thinking like the whole world's like what we do, doing sevā and having kīrtan and prasādam, and then when I see somebody else doing it, oh yeah, right, it's still going on. That's a sign of how devotees can become absorbed in devotional service and no longer feel fearful and also not in anxiety because they're being fully satisfied. And then, of course, there's the philosophy. And as Prabhupada writes in the Sri Upanishad, all forms of incompleteness are experienced due to incomplete knowledge of the complete whole. And by hearing in association with devotees, like Bhagavatam class, then there's also an intellectual satisfaction where we feel that it's all reasonable. It's well reasoned what we're doing. It's not just some whimsical activity. But the philosophical statements of the Bhagavad Gita and the Srimad Bhagavatam are so profound that they satisfy the mind. In fact, I often have the feeling, how do they know everything? When we read the Bhagavatam and they describe what material life is like, it's like, how do they know that? They know all the psychology of why someone would be in the material world and what it feels like to be trounced by the material energy. And the sages describe it so accurately that one feels to be properly situated in devotional service. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu gave these basic concepts that anybody can investigate for themselves. For instance, bhoga tyaga. You can observe this tendency to try to enjoy And once you enjoy, then you get sick of it and you try to give it all up. And it never stops in the material world. You go from one side to the next. And if one can come in contact with the devotees in Srimad Bhagavatam, hey, that's a good idea. Then there's a way that one can enter into the unlimited opportunities of devotional service and feel completely satisfied and no longer have to waver from one side of the spectrum to the other, from bhoga to tyaga. The only alternative is to reconnect with Krishna. Can you open it? Let's have some more discussion. Yes. Do we have a microphone that's not functional? Okay. Maybe then make it, it's ambient already, but make sure you point it to whoever's speaking. Yes, please go ahead. Yeah. 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 I like to say that real renunciation is you've got someone better to be. Like if somebody, you don't even want to hang around them, but they say, hey, can you come to my thing, But it's like, I'm already booked. And yet you not only have somewhere better to be, but you got a really good excuse not to go to the other place. Oh, thank you. I better move to the side until I play it, otherwise it's bad feng shui. The energy gets blocked. Yeah, nice point. Yes. It's dysfunctional, so you have to speak up.
Taste. In my personal experience, I see that sometimes I get really fried out when I'm trying to push myself in devotional service, and I don't get a higher taste. What's happening?
Well, it's life in the material world. There's every chance that as during the human experience, and especially engaged in spiritual life, we may find ups and downs. And it's not necessarily bad, because when we get fried out or frustrated, overwhelmed, it's merely a time to regroup. I mean, all the emotions that come upon us are catalysts to help us improve. And getting fried out is one of the best ones. It's really a way that when one is totally fried out, then you have to look and see, what am I doing that's making me fried out? And you might then readjust if you're frustrated and so forth. So it's kind of like, when you have a material body, you also have to sleep. And I notice that if I don't sleep enough, then I can get a little wiggy. Or if I don't eat at the right times or enough at a certain time, that it can also alter the way I interact with people. And someone might mention to me, it's like, I think you're hungry. Because, I'm working through a material body, and I also have to adjust when I eat, how I eat, making sure I'm taking care of myself. Bhagavatam says, kamasya nendriya pritir labo jivete yavata jivasya tattva jignasya narto yash jeha karmavi. That live a balanced life. Go to Whole Foods if you have to. Get the organic stuff. And do it so that you can have a platform from which to continue doing devotional service. And I find that Life's a series of peaks and valleys. But if one also has used the intellect, if we use our intellect to understand the consequences for anything that we do, how are we making contrast? Anyadevahur sambhavad. We were comparing two different kinds of music. You went to some place and they were playing. You went to a Harinam. Oh, you went to do a program.
And to distribute books there, thinking we'd just be meeting like a beach scene, and there was the biggest biker rally in Florida happening in Daytona Beach. So the repetitive song was the sound of motorcycles and Crazy Train coming from those motorcycles all day when we were distributing. So at the end of the day, we did a Harinam, all of us together, and it completely changed the atmosphere.
I heard the same thing. I went to the opening of the Las Vegas temple. I'll get more specific to what you asked in a second. But the opening of the Las Vegas temple, I wasn't there for the Harinam the day before. I was there for the ceremonies at the temple. But all the devotees who went out to you know Las Vegas? It's a gambling place. Yeah, and then they have what they call the Strip. It's a long area of all these casinos, and people there are very bewildered, and the vibration there is very different. So the devotees who are very experienced at kirtan, and there was at least 100 devotees who went out, and many have been doing it for years, told me the next day that it was the best Harinam they ever had, because the contrast was so great, and the people were so thirsty, because they're coming out of the environment of the hotels and the casinos, and then they heard the chanting, and you could see them come alive. What I was thinking about your question, it's always helpful to define the feeling as clearly as possible and try to look in and see what's happening. Like when I get frustrated or fried out, it's too of a nondescript or amorphous phrase, like fried out, because it can just trigger something when I'm fried out. What does it mean? If I search it out and kind of look inside and find out, like, what exactly is making me fried out? As I said before, sometimes I can trace it back and say, I didn't sleep enough, or I didn't eat the right things, or something like that, and that affected me. Or I felt frustrated because I wasn't able to finish something. I mean, there's always something you can trace back to every emotion that teaches you something. That's why I mentioned, since I might as well throw in something about the book, right? That what's the lesson? If you have the wherewithal, when you feel like that, overwhelmed, you could use different words, like, what is it that's causing it? And what's the lesson behind it? Because all the emotions that we go through, they're meant to teach us something. It's like if you feel pain in your knee. It's it's not random. It's actually, the body is designed when something's rubbing or it's not perfectly aligned, it's gonna put off this warning signal, which is kind of like, eh. You feel it, and you can just say, like, it just hurts, or you can say, why does it hurt? And then you can go back. You can go to somebody who can look at your knee. Maybe they'll take an X-ray, and they say, here's why it hurts. It's inflamed because you've had some, arthritis there, because the knees are getting a little close. I mean, there's a cause to everything, and especially our emotions, they're coming out like little signals. So it's good to get the fried out feeling and trace it back. What am I actually feeling, and why do I feel that way? And if you can trace it back, then you can make an adjustment so that you don't feel that way. Yeah.
objectively observe those emotions without acting on them or without becoming frustrated with them, I notice they kind of just go away in due course of time.
You kind of just answered your own question. Yeah, and Braja Vihari gave me this way to think about emotions. He said, relationship between emotion and reason. He does conflict resolution. And he just notices when people are very emotional, it's hard for them to be rational. When Jagat Trata Prabhu and I were coming back from a walk, the neighbors next door were having a huge fight. It was pretty big, right? Like about 8 on a Richter scale. Slamming doors and this and that. And they were highly emotional. And I was just thinking in that they were swearing at each other and calling each other really vile names and everything like that. And as I was hearing it, I could just feel how they were overwhelmed by some emotion, and they said a bunch of stuff that didn't make sense, and probably that they'll regret later. So in a way, how to take emotions seriously. I mean, it is important to consider them. As I'm saying, where's it coming from? Why do I feel like this? Something must be out of alignment somewhere. But there's also the way in which with a little more information, sometimes, like someone tells you that, such and such, says you're a jerk. And then he's like, well, why should I be called a jerk? He's a jerk, And then the next day you find out they didn't even say that. It's somebody misheard them or something like that. And then you go, oh, I'm really sorry. Or if you take time, instead of just reacting immediately in the emotion, even when you're dealing with people, I notice a lot of times when people call me the first time and leave a message and label it urgent, and then listen to it and they're right in the middle of something. Sometimes I don't have time to get right back immediately, and I'll find the next day they'll call back, oh no, it's okay now. It's okay now. So it's helpful to not buy into them, because there's a body-mind connection. And there's a way in which when this emotions come up, then the body reacts. And when the body reacts, then the mind notices that the body reacts and says, therefore it must be true. It's verification. And then it escalates. And if we're able to be more observant of what's going on, and also take Krishna's advice that don't immediately react or overreact to the ways that we feel. Just find out more about it and how to deal with it. I like the phrase methodical but dispassionate. Find out, well, what is it? And deal with it. And even in relationships, when you do that, if people overreact towards you, then if you respond with something that's reasonable, oh yeah, I'm really appreciating what you're saying. Let's talk about it. That's really different than, well, you too, Then you just get lost in the emotion, which is taking away your reason. Yeah, so it's important in the life of devotional service to find out what kind of emotions are coming up so that you can observe them and look at it and see what's the cause of it. One might, if one doesn't do a thorough investigation and become objective, one could say, well, devotional service is causing it. But it might be how I'm applying the devotional service. And of course, there is a case to be made that, you have to be in a situation where you can have both feet on the ground. And that's to say that, as we talked about, and in the 8th canto of the Bhagavatam, Prabhupada mentions that you should be in a position of strength. It's in the story of Gajendra, the elephant, because he's not a water animal, but he went in the water to show off for his family and to show how cool he was. And then he got attacked by a crocodile. And then he got this sense that I can't win. And it's because he was out of his element. So being, one shouldn't take that like, oh, it's because of devotional service, but there's a way to adjust the way one's living and practicing so that you can take full advantage of it. And yes, please. Mm-hmm.
Cool step, well, hot step. So, is there any way to bridge that gap, or is this
Yes.
emotional?
In customer service, just listen to good customer service agents. They say, I know how you feel. That's how I felt. And here's what I found. There's a first part, I notice, I think it's Apple, and every time I come, they've really been trained heavily in customer service. So the first thing they're trained to do is when you have a complaint, they say, oh, I'm really sorry to hear that. That must really, I hate that when that happens. They empathize first, and then they say, we're going to take care of that for you. So it's first empathize. It's like, oh, yeah, I can really see how that hurts. I have a friend who does that all the time, who always empathizes and then talks about it reasonably. He's a godbrother from way back. And it's just a really balanced person. So when there's some emergency, or that he doesn't overreact, but he empathizes with those who are in the situation. So that can be really helpful. Because the other person needs to be able to feel that you're listening and you're not just going to give some formula back. You have to get a little bit in the trenches also and say, yeah, I know how I've felt like that before, if you have, or, that must really feel bad. It's horrible. And then you can see almost instantly some people will then be much more receptive to what you have to say. Ah,
And activities that were around in the Vedic times, as we know it, because they're not necessarily written in Shastra that Krishna enjoys, such as salsa dancing. But if we know that Krishna loves to dance, could we infer that if I love to dance, but maybe not in a Vedic way, would Krishna meet me in the middle in the spiritual world? Because it's unlimited forms of dance and arts and crafts.
well, I would just say categorically that the spiritual world, according to books like the Brihat of a description of what's going on and what people do and so forth, is all accommodating. I mean, even the material world is all accommodating. It's Krishna's energy, and he's reciprocating with us here. It's more when there's a meeting somebody in the middle. From our side, I guess having a sense of loving Krishna is thinking more like, what does he want? That kind of thing. But there's definitely a sense of, from Krishna, what do you want? And that's why he gives us unlimited opportunity. Like, so I want to fly, okay? How many species of birds are there? There's a lot of species of birds, and he'll give us the opportunity to show our kind of, express ourselves as birds. You look at birds, they're very expressive. They sing and they have feathers, and they know they're cool. You just watch birds, you notice that they sometimes they look at me like when they're about to jump off something and fly, and they're like, hey, you can't do this. It's like people who can surf or ride a skateboard, really, they'll kind of go by you like, yeah, I got this, I'm cool. And living entities get into that mode. There's the birds and then, little squirrels and all kinds of entities. And that's all Krishna's facility. He's meeting us in the middle. We're saying, hey, I'd like to, be able to run up a tree and just hang out in the outdoors or whatever. And it's like, yeah, sure. Here you go. It's all accommodating. So the spiritual world's all accommodating as well. Krishna is unlimited. There's unlimited ways to express one's love for him. And as far as our side goes, one of Prabhupada's disciples talks in her memories of Prabhupada about how she had, when she first met Prabhupada, she just loved him and wanted to do stuff for him, but she didn't know what to do. So she did it her own way, and she said she'd bring him feathers and little shells she'd find on the beach. And Prabhupada just accepted it. You say, ooh, that's dirty, get it out of here, or whatever. What's this? What'd you bring me a rock for? And he took it because he saw it was like on campus the other day. I still have that rock. We're distributing books for donation. And some of the students like, any money. It's an old mantra I've heard about 1 billion times this lifetime. And, say, yeah. And then, one of them ended up, I have a rock I got in Maui. And he was like, we'll take it. It's actually a nice rock. And, she handed over the rock. And we're trying to represent Krishna, right? So we just took it. And we said, yeah, that's cool. Thank you. And, Krishna does that. He'll take anything, just like a mother. You bring him. I could tell a personal story. I used to buy stuff for my dad for his birthday that I know now that he hated. But he never told me that. He never said, I don't like Old Spice cologne. He didn't even wear cologne. It's an old, but it was a big thing for me to go down to the department store and I'd pick out some cologne and I'd bring it back and I'd give it to my father and he'd open the package. Oh, thank you very much. And then I found out later, like, he never used it. He didn't even like wearing cologne. But he accepted it. And Krishna accepts whatever we give. Yeah. Yeah, please.
Likes and dislikes, maybe this type of dancing more than this type of dancing. But because he's the most reservoir of love and accommodation of love, that he could actually accommodate just for my benefit. But he does have preferences.
Well, in Vrindavan, there's a sense of unceremonious devotional service. It means that because it's so intimate, nobody else would think would be an offering to Krishna. Like, as in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, it's mentioned in Goloka, the devotees wrestle with Krishna, and they'll jump on his back. You can't find any church anywhere where it's like yeah, there's God, jump on him, let's beat him up, And but Krishna likes that. That's not like normal, but because it's spontaneous love, and they're just like, he's their friend, and they can dance any way they want there in Goloka because they're so in love with Krishna. They just, there's no rules there. There's no rules at all. It's a completely lawless land, but it's lawless not out of a sense of trying to be retrograde and at odds with the rules out of a sense of false independence, but it's out of, you just love Krishna and they innocently offer things to him in all kinds of ways that aren't normal. So, they dance like monkeys sometimes together, and they make all kinds of crazy sounds while they're out playing, imitating animals. And when they're having picnic lunch, sometimes, they'll take something out of their mouth and say, Krishna, this tastes great, you take it. That's described in, when he goes for a picnic on the day of Agasara. And that's when Brahma was looking down, because Brahma's more in this thing, is like, you can't treat God like that. And how could that be God? Even Krishna's eating with his left hand. He's just acting like a kid. And they're all around him acting like kids. And Brahma, his name is Vidhi, because he follows so many rules. You don't get to be Brahma unless you followed all the rules of Varnashram for 100 lifetimes. If you followed them perfectly. And so when he's observing, he's like, what is this crazy place? That can't be him. I'm going to try something. I'll test him out and see if he actually has any power, that little kid. So he steals all the boys and the calves. And then we know the story, right? But it just goes to show, that's the mood there. There's no expectation. It's all flowing spontaneously. Like we talk about offering things to Krishna. You got to do it this way, ring the bell. No, the bell has to have a little plate under it and stuff like that. And we have to do that in the beginning to make sure that we're not just doing what we want. And there's a way that by being in touch with Krishna in a more reverent way, and reverent in the sense that it's not my desires that are important, but it's yours. But then there comes a time when it becomes more and more spontaneous, which is the most relishable for Krishna, actually. As it says in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, he likes it better when his girlfriends criticize him and say, Krishna at the door, tell him to go away. I don't want to talk to him. He likes that better, says Kaviraj Goswami, than the reverent prayers of the Vedas. They're like, Sastra, Shisha, Puruja. They're offering all this reverence. And it's like, eh. But the other thing, like, my devotees, they just play with Krishna. So we have to be worried. Our main thing, we have a lot of fear that our desires won't be fulfilled in the relationship. Because there's so much disappointment in the material world in our relationships since the time immemorial. And then we start projecting that on Krishna, that, maybe he'll be like that too. And even there's so many weird philosophies in the world. They're just bizarre, that turn God into a psychopath. That, he'll send people to hell forever. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. There are all these ways in which, and then these impressions come into us, and then we have a little fear that maybe my desires won't be fulfilled. I won't be able to express myself. But on the contrary, now we only get a little play box here in the material world, and it's only got a few things. Actually, only 3, but you mix them up and try to make them something else. But the spiritual world's unlimited, and it's hard to understand that, and what real happiness is, that it's ever expanding, and that we won't be disappointed by the relationship as much as we are here. And that's what Krishna says in the Gita, Vita Raga Bhaya Krodha. There's 3 attitudes, he says, that you need to get over in order to actually advance or really feel happy. Raga, which means unnecessary attachment. That's the word. Being attached to the material world and sense gratification inordinately, thinking you're going to get something out of it. Bhaya means fear of of my personal existence, because relationships never work out in the material world, and therefore I think my relationship with Krishna is not going to work. And krodha means anger. I get so frustrated because there's so many different ideas that I think that it all must be bogus, because everyone has conflicting ideas. So Krishna says, Vita Raga Bhaya Krodha Manmaya Mamupashrita Bahavo Jnana Tapasya Putamad Bhavamakit. He said, don't worry, a lot of people have these hang-ups. And he says, Bahavo Jnana, so many have overcome them. Yeah, there's some hesitation, fear that I'll be cheated again, and I won't be able to fulfill my desire. I think rather than trying to take that individual example of, a style of dance or everything, it sheets back to a kind of unrest that we have, and it goes into a lot of different areas under these categories, raga bhaya krodha. Like I'm not really going to get what I want out of the relationship, or maybe God actually isn't fair, and that I'm being overlooked or punished unnecessarily and things like that. And that's ignorance. But when we wake up and we start to experience that actually Krishna is reciprocating in amazing ways with us all the time, and he's trying to fulfill all our desires. And you look, even at the pastimes, the one I was just mentioning, the calves wandered away, and the boys got upset because that's what they're supposed to take care of, but they're having so much fun. And Krishna says, no, you stay. I'm going to go get them. That's the way Krishna is. He wants, he's the devotee of his devotees. So it's not like if you want to dance some way, he's going to get all upset because we're his parts and parcels. So we'll have another little kīrtan. Carl is saying yes. And what else? One by Bhaktivinoda Thakur is Jeev Jago. For many years I sang it kind of with Jeev Jago, Gora Chandra Bole, Koti Nidra Jao Maya, Pisha Chira Kole. And my friend Havi Prabhu, who's a musician, a consummate musician, he once said to me, that tune is too cheery for the song. So because it's about the living entity in the womb and how it comes to consciousness after 7 months and then realizes that I did it again. Caught back here in the cycle of birth and death, and has an awareness that as soon as I leave the birth channel, I'm going to forget again. And then it's Lord Chaitanya's voice reminding the living entity that that's what you promised in the womb, that you'd take up Krishna consciousness, but then you came out and again you forgot. It's been going on since a time that we can't remember. And so then I said, well, what's the right tune? So he did this. Jeev Jago, Jeev Jago, Gora Chandra Bole. Doesn't it sound more somber? I'm thinking about the Lord Chaitanya's pastimes, the Gambhira. The final pastimes, Lord Chaitanya, which started just after he received a note from Advaita Acharya that said, there's enough rice in the marketplace. It was an enigmatic note. Swarup Damodar understood it, but he didn't say anything. And others thought, what does that mean? But what it meant was that, and then Lord Chaitanya responded, he said, he calls me to come and then he tells me to leave. Because Advaita Acharya is the one who called out for Lord Chaitanya to appear in the world, to alleviate the suffering due to ignorance. And then Mahaprabhu was saying, he called me, now he's telling me to go back. But Kaviraj Goswami says right after that, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's pastimes changed and became mad in love of God. And he stayed in the Gambhira, tiny little room, and Swarup Damodar and Ramananda Roy would sing him songs from Chandidas and Jayadev Goswami and from the Bhagavatam that were just to stimulate his mood of his relationship with Krishna and the loving relationship, and they would drive him mad in love of God. and they would sing them in the right tunes that matched the mood that they were singing. So really the udipana, or the way that the sense of devotional service is stimulated, is through the singing. As I mentioned earlier about raga, when you're able to sing beautiful verses, especially the Hare Krishna mantra, and it goes in really deeply, all other things happen because of that. All other things happen means, like, starting with Vasudeve Bhagavati Bhakti Yoga Prayojita Janiya Yashivaya Gyam Gyanam Chayara Haitukam, one naturally has a sense of detachment from the material world and knowledge of one's position beyond the body. Prabhupada only had a few tunes. He didn't sing unlimited tunes. He kept it really simple. I was once in Chicago, in Donavere, Prabhu was singing. And there was a style at the time where you get the kīrtan going really fast, and then you'd stop chanting, and it would just go ching, 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 and then all of a sudden you'd start up again chanting. And Prabhupada was sitting in the Vyasasana, and he watched that, and then stop. The room was packed, and he stopped the whole kīrtan. He said, "What have you done? Where did you learn that?" Donavere. So I don't even remember what he said. It was, everyone was, uh-oh. And then Brahmananda was there, and he had Brahmananda, he said, "Brahmananda, you sing." And then Brahmananda, although the other kirtan was very melodious and it was going quite well, then Brahmananda's Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, really simple. And Prabhupada did that different times. He would stop kirtans if they got too innovative, and he would keep the simple things. And there's a new book out by Jayaveta Swami about kirtan standards. Basically, that not many people follow. Anyway, it just came out, so it takes a little time. Well, you want to go out and do Harinam or something? Okay. Is it still raining? Try. We do Harinam up and down the street, right? Yeah, we can even go in the bars. It's bona fide. You can go in and do Harinam. It's some of the best place to distribute books. What? Inside the bars. Okay. Okay. While we're waiting, any other things? Okay. Let's do chapter 7. Or 8 or 9. Let's do 7. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. You know, my flight was 5 hours late leaving San Francisco for a half-hour flight down. And when that happens, when the airline keeps delaying, what they do is they put out right on the counter in front of where the gate is, they put out a bunch of snacks. At least United does that. I didn't eat the snacks, but I needed some water. I didn't notice there was water there for a while. And so I went over there and I grabbed a bottle of the water. And the name of the water is Nama. N, long A. It actually has the diagram. You've heard of it? I still have the bottle. It's Nama water. I thought it must be a sign of some kind. Shravanadi Jal. They have some Nama water. Okay, let's do chapter 7. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha Maya Sakta Manapartha Yogam Yunjan Manashrayaha Asamshayam Samagramam Yata Gyasyasi Tashrinu Jnanam Teham Savigyanam Idam Bhaksham Yasheshataha Yajyat Va Neha Bhuyo Naj Gyatavyam Avashishyate Manushyanam Sahasreshu Kashid Yatati Siddhaye Yatatam Api Siddhanam Kashchim Mam Veti Tatpadaha Bhumirapo Nalo Vayu Kammano Bhutirevacha Ahankara Iti Ame Vina Prakritirashtada Apareyamitastvanyam Prakritim Vidime Param Jiva Bhutam Mahabaho Yayedam Daryate Jagat Etad Yonini Bhutani Sarvanityupadaraya Aham Krishnasya Jagata Prabhava Pralayastata Mattak Paratanam Nanyat Kinchidasti Dhananjaya Mai Sarvam Idam Protam Sutre Manigana Iva Rasoham Apsakaunteya Prabhasmi Shashishuryayo Pranavak Sarva Vedeshu Shabdake Purusham Drishu Punyo Gandha Prativyam Cha Tejas Chasmi Vibhavaso Jivanam Sarva Bhuteshu Tapas Chasmi Tapasvishu Bijam Mam Sarva Bhutanam Vidhi Partha Sanatanam Budhir Buddhimantam Asmi Tejas Tejas Vinamaham Balam Balavatam Chaham Kamaraga Vivarjitam Dharma Viroto Bhuteshu Kamosmi Bharatarshava Echaiva Sattvika Bhava Rajasastamasaschaye Mati Eva Etis Vidhi Natvaham Teshu Che Mayi Tribir Gunamayer Bhaver Ebi Sarvam Idam Jagat Mohitam Na Bijanati Amigya Pranamavyayam Daivehi Esha Gunamayi Mama Maya Duratyaya Mameva Ye Prapadyante Mayametam Tarantite Naham Dushkatunamura Prapadyante Naradama Maya Pritagyana Asuram Bhavamashrita Chaturvida Bhajante Mam Jana Sukritino Arjuna Arto Jignasa Artarti Gyani Cha Bharatarshava Tesham Gyani Nitya Yukta Eka Bhakti Vishishyate Priyo Hi Gyani Notyartam Aham Sacha Mama Priya Udarak Sarva Evaite Gyani Twatmaiva Mematam Astita Sahiyuktatma Mamevam Utamam Gatim Bahunam Janmanam Mante Gyanavan Mam Prapadyate Vasudeva Sarvamiti Sa Mahatma Sadurlakaha Kamaistaiste Hrityagana Prapadyante Nyadevata Tam Tam Niyamamastaya Prakritya Niyatasvaya Yo Yo Yam Yam Tadum Bhakta Shraddhe Architam Ichati Tasya Tasya Chalam Shadham Tameva Viridham Yaham Sataya Shataya Yuktas Tasya Ardanam Ihate Labate Chatata Kaman Mayaiva Vihitan Hitan Antavattu Palam Tesham Tadbhavatyalpamedasam Devan Devaya Joyanti Madbhakta Yanti Mamapi Hatyantanapanam manyate mama buddhaya param bhavam ajananto mamavyayam anutamam naham prakasha sarvasya yogamaya samavrita mudoyam nabicharati lokamamajam avyayam vedaham samatitani vartamanani charjuna bhavishyani cha bhutani mam tu vedana kasyana icha dvesha samutena dvandva mohena bharata sarva bhutani sammoham sargayanti parantapa yesham tvantagatam papam jananam punyakarmanam te dvandva mohanir mukta bhajanti mam dradavrata jaramarana mokshaya mama shrita yatanti te brahma tadvadu kritsnam adhyatmam karma chakilam sari bhutari daivam mam sari yajnam chayevadu prayana kali pichamam te vadur yukta chetasaha Om Tat Sariti Srimad Bhagavad Gita Supanishatsu Brahma Vidyayam Yoga Shastre Shri Krishna Arjuna Samvade Gyan Vigyan Yoga Nama Saptamodhyayaha Hari Om